Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to the DM Roundtable for April 2020. This is our chance for patrons and I to get together and discuss topics in tabletop RPGs, and by sharing our ideas, thoughts, and experiences, we can all become better GMs and DMs. The DM Roundtable discussion is open to all patrons at every level of patreon.com/roguewatson. You don't even have to be an active participant. You can jump in here and lurk to your heart's content. We're glad to have you. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, Andy, and Chris, and gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy Numa, Marco Stead, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, AK, Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, Sam, Ross, Limpy Spuds, and Jerome. Thank you all very much for your support. This month's topic, as determined by the poll on the Patreon page by a pretty good margin, is NPCs, specifically when NPCs join the party. How often and when do we use them? How do we use them in combat? Do we use NPC stat blocks, or do we build them like player characters? And how do we avoid the dreaded DMPC? Joining me for this month's DM Roundtable, we have Sean, aka Cert2B. Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening. Sam, good early morning.
Good morning.
Andy.
Salutations.
Marcos.
Hey, what's going on?
Tiny.
Hello.
And special guest, you know him as Mr. Mannix himself, Chris.
What's happening?
Hey. So NPCs in the party. I would have very little experience with this up until Tomb of Annihilation. I felt like I used them pretty sparingly early on. Especially was not something I wanted to even mess with as a new DM starting out in Phandelver. You know, the players are the party, and I was gonna say I'm the enemy, but that's actually not what you're supposed to think as the DM. But I'm the game. Sometimes you are. I give it then take it away. But even in Prince of the Apocalypse, I still didn't use party NPCs hardly ever that I remember. And then all of a sudden, Tomb of Annihilation happened, and I went full 180. And used a huge amount of party NPCs, partly because of the way that campaign was structured. There wasn't really a chance, to pop over to a town and just talk to people and all that. I kind of had to bring the quest along with you as a way to get around the interesting geographical limitations of that campaign. So I ended up using NPCs a lot more in that campaign. Less based on the fact that I wanted to really use NPCs and more because I just needed that to kind of get the story going in a lot of cases. And I feel like I have a lot more experience using them now, but I am very curious to hear how all of you have used NPCs before in your campaigns, and or if at all, or if you avoid them. Sean, I believe you were here first, so why don't we start off with you? Just give me your initial thoughts on using NPCs in your campaigns, in your parties specifically.
Not a problem. The first thing that obviously comes to mind, especially in terms of avoiding the GM PC, as you mentioned, is you never want an NPC in the party to ever outshine any single person in the party. They either there's a couple sort of unwritten house rules that I tend to use in regards to NPCs in the party. One being that if they are of any kind of level, they're going to be if tier 1 level below, tier 2 levels below. That's very sort of play it by ear, so to speak. The other thing that I do is I never roll skill sets or skill checks for the NPC. I always assume the NPC fails perception, fails this. I leave that to the party,
Okay.
unless they have to do a jump check or something like that. And at which point, and I don't let them steer the conversation unless they're kind of like a lore-based NPC where they have something to offer. You're in a archaeological tomb and the NPC is an archaeologist, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that so far. Sam, give me your initial thoughts on NPCs.
It's not something I've used a huge amount with my parties, to be honest. I think the only time I have is when the party managed to convince an ogre to come along with them.
That's a good NPC.
Yeah. They sort of looked at it as a fluffy puppy, so I played him purely evil, and somehow they were still upset when he died. But yeah, it worked out. But it's something I am looking at going forward. So part of one of the quests I've written is going to have an evil NPC join the party as sort of like a red herring for later on, where they eventually find out he is part of the evil plan.
That's good.
So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Mainly hoping for some pointers and stuff from tonight, and seeing what everyone else has done, and trying to take what I can from that. Really,
you bring up a really, really good subtopic that I wanted to bring up, which was using NPCs in the party that are maybe not aligned with the party. And perhaps you've got your own, the coolest thing you can do, I think, is have the classic, betrayal of a character that actually means something to the players. Either they had this going into the party, they infiltrated the party and then they're going to betray them later, or maybe the party just treated them like dirt, and through other actions or decisions the party made, then that party member could actually, or that NPC could actually betray the party. That's a very, very tricky thing to pull off. I will go ahead and say, because we're past that point in our Tomb of Annihilation campaign, spoilers if you haven't made it to, I don't know, probably like the Fane of the Night Serpent section of our Tomb campaign. And Chris, this will be interesting for you, but one of the guides from Port Nyan Zaru, again, spoilers for Tomb of Annihilation. I'm going to go ahead and spoil a big part of that. Sorry. Skip ahead for a couple minutes, but one of the guides is Salida, and as written in the book, she is an agent of Raz Nisi, and you can have her join the party as a guide, and she will just inform Raz Nisi along the way. And one of the things I wanted to do, and you can go back and watch earlier episodes of Crafting Annihilation, is I wanted to have her join the party and then have her lead the party into Omu. And then she drugs the party or does something to basically get them captured into the Fane. And that was a very complex number of things that had to happen to get that off successfully. And ultimately, I felt really, I never felt comfortable basically hand waving the party getting captured and thrown into a dungeon. That always it didn't seem like that was a very natural thing to do. I'm very hesitant about taking away that much agency like that. And ultimately, it was going to be very tricky for Salida to even stick with the party for that length of time and try to keep up that ruse, because especially we were doing the pirate ship thing and just all of these things were going on, and it would have been such a pain in the ass ultimately, because we didn't make a straight shot to Omu at that point. But that would have been a really cool, interesting thing to do. And I'm curious if any of you, I'm going to go ahead and throw this to anybody, has had any kind of success or has even tried to have a party member that ultimately worked against the rest of an NPC party member that ultimately worked against the actual players.
I had something close, maybe not really long term.
Okay.
For one, I had a player who wanted to join a campaign I was running that had played the very end of it. So I'm like, all right, well, maybe you betray them in the very end, and that's the twist. But for NPCs, nothing super long term. The campaign I'm running now, I had introduced an NPC that did have kind of a hidden agenda and played it off really, really well. The PCs did not pick up on her deception at all. And to me, nothing is more satisfying as a DM than getting an NPC embedded with the group with their own evil agenda, and the players don't see it coming until they realize, oh shit, it's a wonderful feeling.
It seems like it. Yeah, that was kind of the dream I was thinking of, but ultimately I wasn't able to quite get the stars aligned to make it happen. Sean, go ahead.
I've actually had a scenario that I ran where I did things kind of in the opposite direction. So a little bit of a setup for this particular description that I'm doing. Basically, when I ran Minds of Phandelver a long time ago. But one of my players' backgrounds was he was a soldier, and he was looking for an old friend of his that was apparently in trouble. And so I threw in an NPC into the storyline in one of the areas that they went to, where it was this, another soldier that he had fought alongside with back when they were both in the service, so to speak. And the NPC soldier was actually working with the enemy in the Mines of Phandelver. I forget what the group is called. But as it turns out, he wasn't a willing participant in this because they had kidnapped his daughter. So he was working against the party, but also working against them, trying to figure out how to kind of work both sides, because he's mainly focused on getting his daughter back.
Mm-hmm.
And because he was friends with one of the PCs, and there was a lot of camaraderie there, and he was a brother in arms, he was a fellow soldier, that type of thing. If anyone has ever served in any amount of time or capacity, that brotherhood is as solid as it comes.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of played into that. And then he ended up admitting to what he was doing because of the role playing that was going on. And they actually helped him rescue her. So that became a whole different story thread that just kind of got put in.
That sounds amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I couldn't have had it work out any better if I had fully planned it. So it was one of those things that it just worked.
Nice. Andy, initial thoughts of using NPCs in your as party members?
In my experience in the past, I guess it comes down to the players that you're playing with, because some groups will take to it just fine. And, I'm unlikely to ever use an NPC if I've got a party of player characters who I feel are likely to tie them into a ball and bowl them down a hallway looking for traps. Because that just doesn't ever really pan out.
Won't last very long.
No. So, it a lot of it depends on the group. If you've got a group that's good with role play, and the best roles that NPCs fill are kind of, like Sean said, they're fairly good if you keep them in the background and just use them as a convenient info dump. But they also, sometimes it kind of helps to have a party mascot, and certain NPCs are very good at that. The famous example from the Sunless Citadel adventure was Meebo the Kobold. So many parties pick him up as a party mascot NPC character.
There's that goblin in Phandelver too. That's kind of supposed to be that. You can get
everybody wants to adopt a goblin or
Snigbat.
Snigbat, yeah.
I've actually used Snigbat in multiple adventures because I love that goblin so much.
Snigbat gets around. Hey, Chris, you used a goblin for a while, didn't you?
Oh yeah, the same one. I think.
Is it Snigbat?
Yeah. You used Snigbat too, because he was the one that went to the grandfather tree in the Silvery Woods, who you guys rescued and then took the goblins over there. I remember specifically because there was an adventure when you guys were on the hippogriffs flying from one of those towns with the Harpers over, and you were like, "Oh wait, that's Snigbat."
Right.
I specifically remember that scene.
Yeah, that was Storm Kings, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Came up twice in there. Once in the very beginning. There was some. He was just part of a Goblin Caves network, and then later on, I think it was the Fire Giants that enslaved them.
Mm-hmm.
And then you guys freed them from there, and then they went into the woods. Yeah,
you just told them go in the woods and make a home or something.
But he had that very similar function where it was just like yeah, you're our buddy.
In that case, that was a very fun NPC, and I liked it. I don't think that he ever joined the group as a combatant, though. So one thing I'd like to discuss is, are there good times, or have you had any successes, or do you have any cautionary tales about using NPCs to join the party to where they actually literally are there for combat purposes as well?
There's tons of cautionary tales, but I did have one great success story I wanted to share. We had one of our recent adventures. One of my players was a rogue who had a background in a thieves guild he had a falling out with, where he essentially rebelled against some of the darker things they were doing and went off to seek adventure instead. And he found one of his old comrades during an espionage mission where they were trying to gather some information. He'd been in prison and wound up deciding to break him out. So I had him tag along with them for about 8 sessions or so. And I made him much lower level, but I gave him a twice per day ability. It was the Black Sliver clan combo attack, and where he could essentially use his action to do a combo attack with someone else who was trained. And so John's character was, essentially he could use his action to give John's character a really cool attack.
It's like a JRPG, like Chrono Trigger Unity move or something.
Basically, and they were, he was really into it. He thought that was very cool. It's a nice way to allow them to participate, to give you a little bump, to add all the role play, but the PC still gets to take the spotlight.
That is a really clever idea. I like that a lot. I also like that a lot of you are specifically using NPCs to flesh out your players' backstories.
Well, I mean, that's one of the best ways to fill out a backstory. The whole giving someone a bond that really ties them into the world and invests them into the story is how you create memorable stories, I think.
Yeah, agreed. Marcos, we haven't had your initial spiel on using party member NPCs before. Let me know.
Party member NPCs. I love them, honestly. But again, kind of like how I said previously, it's based on the party. If the party is not interested, one will never show up. They have to show, a want or seek out something that would join their party. Personally, I love henchmen. I love NPCs. And a lot of the older editions, like first and second edition, have extremely fleshed out rules for hiring henchmen, having people carry your stuff for you. To me, having henchmen is like an essential part of Dungeons and Dragons, where it's literally you go into the dungeon, you loot it, and you pull out the treasure. It depends on how heavy it is in the game, but I usually always have some type of rules and morale stuff set up, depending on how they treat said henchman or said NPC that they pick up along the way. 90% of the time, my NPCs usually are in the background as comic relief, or as info dumps, or as wagon operators.
Mm-hmm.
There was one campaign that I ran that was partially Spelljammer, and they had essentially a whole crew of NPCs, and each one of them had, if they wanted to, they can go in and talk to each one, learn about them, side quests that would go part of that. It was a whole 9 yards. But it was only really like the deeper the players delved into it, the more I had for them. So it wasn't something where it was like it was never the case where like they'd just be walking down the path and also one says, yes, it's time to start my side mission. My brother's twice removed cousin needs assistance. No, it's like if they talk to that guy, he would let them know. But at the same time, they do need to treat them like people if they're going to take on responsibility of having them. I do have like a morale counter kind of, where it's like, oh, you got slighted by John the Bard. Oh, he's going to remember that. Oh, wait, you decided to short him on his payment. You agreed to 2 gold a day, not 2 silver. He's going to remember that. And then, hey, if that morale gets low enough, you might wake up with an axe in your back and all your stuff missing. You might end up getting kicked off a ledge,
But how effective is
before?
How effective is that? Because I had rules for this initially. I usually overrule things in the beginning, and then as the game goes on, I usually just kind of hand wave things away as it goes. And I had a whole morality system because I knew I was going to use like all these guides and all these different NPCs. So I was like, all right, there's going to be charisma checks, and there's going to be like a counter where they start at like 10, and if they go below this number, and I was like, I forgot about that after a couple sessions. But how effective is it for a party NPC to actually do something about it because they're outnumbered.
No, it's as effective as because if Snakebat joins the party, Snakebat's options are if they get abused to leave, or take it. Realistically, a little goblin like that isn't going to have many options when it comes to taking on those bigger people.
Right.
But like if you have a shield dwarf, if you have Bruno or Golden Mountain, hired to help you, and you slight him, he has more options. He has an entire clan over in Gold Mountain that he can go back to and say, hey, these adventurers, they're pieces of shit. They slighted me. They said I was short.
What if the adventurers just murder him though?
Well, I mean, but that's the thing too. They murder him, and then the clan's going to be like, hey, remember Brunor?
Yeah.
Where'd he go? His family's looking for him.
That's when the screen pops up and says the clan will remember that.
And I do not have a problem with doing director stance with my players as well. To say, hey, you said you want to do this, and by all means you can do it, but here's the consequences. You do realize that you have a contract with Mr. Gold Mountain. If you slight him, it's going to have this repercussion, and this repercussion. Your character has a standard intelligence, so they would know this. Is this something you would like to do? Oh yeah. I want to stab in the back. Understood. Stab in the back. Roll attack. Ooh, we crit 1. Ooh, we go through the motions, but I'm not afraid of telling my players this is what's going to happen. This is what's happening. You don't need to roll an insight check to see that Snakebat the goblin is hungry and you haven't fed him in 2 days. Feed your goblin. He's hungry.
Feed your goblins.
Exactly. So, I don't have a problem stepping back and playing that if they do take down that responsibility, because a lot of times they forget. They like stabbing things,
Yeah.
So it's like, hey, by the way, you haven't paid for your wagon. You're going to pay for your wagon?
Yeah, I had a system set up that went by the wayside real quick after that. And it was a whole thing about if the NPC is likes the party this much, and because all my shit's based on video games, that's what I have to go off of. Then they'll agree to enter the dungeon, and if it goes down this low, then they won't agree to enter the dungeon. And it ended up becoming more of an esoteric role playing thing where I was like, well, does that person just want to go in? It was less a mechanic thing and more does this person just want to go into this dungeon or not? And it was a DM thing where I was like, I'm okay with having. Yeah, I was like, I'm okay with having the NPCs join the party through their jungle treks, but I'm going to do everything in my power to have them stop at the entrance to a dungeon and say, "Hey, I don't feel the need to fucking go in here. I got you to the place, and now you guys can go in." And
now, you did stick to your guns quite a bit with River and
that's Baxi.
Flask of Wine.
Yeah.
You stuck to your guns with them pretty consistently though. In the beginning, they were just like, "Yeah, we'll help you because you're adventure with you." But as the adventure went on, it was like, these guys are weird and crazy.
Yeah.
They stuck to Celeste because Celeste treated them decently.
Yeah.
But towards the end, it was like, "We're not doing this. No, we're not helping you."
Yeah.
Celeste may help you, but no, you stuck to it.
I really enjoyed the Tabaxi just for the reason that they were so despised. I loved it. It was so entertaining.
I have no idea why. It just came out of nowhere too. We just hate these guys.
They were just so passive and good natured. It was so easy to just mistreat them.
Like frogs, right?
That's right. Exactly.
Oh man.
Is Orvex still alive? I didn't see him.
Orvex is alive.
He is? Okay.
Yeah, to everybody that I talked about this on crafting, but I straight up forgot to put Orvex on the level 2 map when you guys went down to level 2.
And
no one noticed.
He's probably leaning
when I
against the
mentioned
wall
bowling
with a hole in
NPCs
his
down the
chest.
hall, when I mentioned bowling NPCs down the hall looking for traps, I was specifically thinking of poor Orbex.
Yeah,
poor Orbex. That's
the problem is I've been soured on NPCs because so many of our NPCs that we've had have been just treated like garbage from the party. So it's been a little rough having them along
that
the
is
ride.
Interesting. Yeah.
We made a joke that Orvex is just back in that wine room, just drinking wine the whole time.
Oh, Orvex was straight up a captured enemy, so he deserves everything he gets.
No, he wasn't.
Well, but
you guys
that's the thing.
rescued
Hold
him.
on, yeah.
You
Hold
rescued
on.
him from his terrible situation, and then he never once has gone against the party. I will die on the hill of defending
Yeah,
Orvex.
same here. I will lay on the cross for Orvex because he's gotten the short stick in your guys' campaign.
He's been nothing but helpful and forthright.
We just decided at some point that he was an enemy that we've captured, and that's what we
But no, it was
believe now.
freaking Celeste. Celeste was like, I hate this person. And everybody else was like, oh, Celeste hates him. He was bad. Okay.
Yeah.
I think y'all's instincts are great though. On who to mistreat and who to like. I mean,
Yeah.
I really enjoy it.
It's funny if nothing else.
I think
But what I was going to say about
Good.
I was going to say what I was going to say about that. Oh man, I've got a lag. I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
The system that was you were talking about for tracking morale and charisma checks and all that sort of thing. Those sorts of systems, unlike video games, those sorts of systems actually work best if you play them like first edition D&D, where the players know all the rules, where it's not something that's obfuscated, where you say like, okay, you have this hireling, you can tell them to do this, and essentially the PCs kind of decide their actions. But if every time they tell the NPC to do something, you as a DM decide, is this something that is harming the relationship or helping it? That's when you make the roll. And that's kind of how it, yeah.
And you make all that stuff public?
Well, I mean, that's, like I said, that's the way it was in first edition. When you went up in level as a fighter, there was a table that said how many followers and hirelings you got per level, and it was just kind of a thing that was expected, and that's how the rules for it were laid out. That all fell by the wayside because everything in D&D that's bookkeeping eventually falls by the wayside because who wants to do that shit?
Right. That'd be interesting though. It'd be even more Telltale Games-esque, where it would be like, oh, you say a thing to an NPC and like the DM tells you like, oh, they didn't like that. That's going in the journal.
This person likes you 2 points more.
That's right.
Score 2 points. They're sure to die for me now.
I mean, our problem also in this current campaign is that we're all over the board. Like some players really like certain NPCs and other characters just don't at all. So I'm not sure how you would conglomerate that into one overarching party score.
Yeah, especially with a lot of folks. And maybe that's something that all of you have run into also, especially when you create a NPC that's specifically tied to one person's backstory. Does that ever create conflict with other players at the table? Is like some of those players like morally opposed to this character?
Oh, definitely. I mean, that, in any good party where people have good backstories and are really invested in the scene that's been set, somebody's going to have a problem with it at some point. And, those create some of the best role-playing situations as long as it doesn't involve, copious bloodletting in the end.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Orvex is probably the obvious example with Celeste kind of hating him out of the gate.
We had Theron's buddy who was just smelly, and none of us really liked him. But
you guys are just terrible people.
You got the impression that even Theron didn't really like him. He just kind of
that's true.
He did kind of end up at that.
It's like, it's Hugh. Yeah, it's Hugh.
They kind of took on the trope of like the loser friend, like from years ago. That's like, I guess I got to help this guy, but he's really got to get his shit together.
We were friends in high school, and your life has gone a really bad direction.
That's all he cares about. Because I just kind of went with that. Because Theron kind of gave that to me as like a sigh. I guess I'll help him. And so I just made him more and more like pathetic and crazy.
And it doesn't always work out like the DM thinks, but sometimes it makes for a great story. I thought Theron and Hugh's scenes were hilarious as a viewer. So,
what's the kind of elvish lady's name that kind of has the dragon scales and the pseudo dragon? I forget her name.
Zendala.
Zendala. Yeah, I thought she created some pretty good conflict in the game where, your players actually, I think, were fighting each other maybe at one point. I kind of forget.
Yeah.
I mean, George sided with her, and and then he played like he was
Feel like I didn't.
mesmerized by her or something like
Yep.
that afterwards. Like,
Yeah, that's true. That's something
That
I
was
kind
pretty
of
good.
that's something I kind of ended up doing in Tomb, was to try to take a specific character from the campaign that was in the book and then tie them into a player. So Zendala was for Mannix, Hugh was for Theron, the Red Wizard's lady, I can't remember the name of now, was Kaless. And with Zendala was an interesting case of this NPC as written is way too powerful to join the party at basically any point in the campaign, except I guess the very end. Like she is, I don't know what, but she's got either 4th or 5th level spells, so she's like a level 8 or 9 or 10 PC as written, but like with the mage stat block, whatever kind of mage she is. I think she's actually a unique stat block in the book. So
Zendala is one of those NPCs that you could have reappear in different campaigns and just have the players be like,
Right.
yeah, and it was cool that I actually got to kind of escape with her, because I feel like she's one of those complex characters, and I didn't want to write her as a pure villain or anything like that. I thought I wanted to make things a little bit more interesting and have that storyline go, and without really knowing on my end how it was going to end either. Like that, that whole thing could have ended in a multitude of ways. And that was one that I didn't have an ending planned because of it was such an open-ended situation, and obviously tying in the whole Artist's Ring of Winter thing as well. But yeah, Zendala ended up being pretty interesting, even though I didn't actually use her as a party member, because it would have been terribly imbalancing for the and Chris, that's why, if you recall, in the very beginning of the campaign, when you first met her, you guys rescued her from the boat, and you brought her to the city. And she snuck out like that first night, and you heard her going and all that.
Yeah, I remember because I was pissed because I'd set up like
You
I forget
did.
what I did.
Some kind of like
what I'd done.
tripwire alarm and like all these
Yeah.
precautions. Yeah.
a bell.
Yeah. And that was the one thing I had to have happen, is like, I have to have
She
this
has to
woman
leave.
just fucking disappear because she is too powerful to go along. I could have just nerfed her and made her a smaller level mage, but I was already knowing that, man, you guys are going to get a ton of NPCs. Like, this is not something I want to have like saddled with you all. And I think a spellcasting NPC a powerful one can cause a lot of problems because that can solve a lot of solutions that I don't necessarily want you to solve, that early on. So I had to have her disappear and just kind of reappear throughout. But I was able to have her like come back and forth a couple times, which was really fun.
Yeah.
Because she can like transform and fly and get around. So that was very nifty.
That also worked storytelling wise though too, because it just made Mannix just not trust her from then on out. It became this very like suspicious character for him.
You're already very untrustworthy though, as Mannix. What about specifically, and I really want to cover this, using party members in combat? When do you all do that? And when is it appropriate to do that?
I think it's dangerous, isn't it? Like it kind of bumps into the issue of like NPC power level. Like I forget who was saying it earlier. Just try like not having an NPC ever approach the power level of the players, because then just you don't want them to get the killing blow ever, basically.
But you also don't want to go the opposite direction, because then you wind up playing an escort mission, and everybody hates escort missions.
Right. You don't want them to feel useless.
So my party, when they got their ogre, we were doing Prince of the Apocalypse. They found the ogre in Sacred Stone Monastery. He was a lot more powerful than they were when they found him. Which
what level were they?
Low, too low to be doing.
To be hanging out with an ogre.
Low enough to need the ogre.
Yeah, and they put him to really good use. And he was there in every combat, and they sort of worked out ways of either like hiding around a corner and drawing enemies in, and then whack-a-mole as they walked around the corner with the ogre. But I didn't level him as they leveled. So they went from sort of relying on his combat power and sort of building their sort of plans around it, to then trying to find ways of keeping him alive and trying to control him in combat because he was running into encounters that he was never going to be able to win. He eventually died at the siege of Delmon Ranch.
That's such a cool sentence to say.
It turned out to be a pretty cool story. But it's
how long was that ogre with the party?
Cool. Quite a while, to be fair.
Yeah.
Maybe 12 sessions.
Okay.
A pretty decent time. They were, I think, 3 or 4 levels worth.
Wow.
So, yeah, they looked after him all right, and I think the plan was they were going to release him into the wild after the siege because they worked out at that point he
run with
good.
the other ogres in the field.
We sent him to an ogre farm upstate.
Yes.
That sounds terrible.
It was
Did
fun.
they pay him, or they feed him, or you said just took good care of him? I'm fascinated by this.
He's obviously being sort of bullied by the Orogs that he was with. So they sort of healed him up when they found him hurt, and then rolled a ridiculously good set of charisma checks to get him to help with the fight, and then just continued rolling pretty well for the rest of Sacred Stone Monastery. Fed him, healed him, let him rip the arms off people that they were fighting. So he was then happy. So he stuck with them, and they always made sure that he was fed and that he had things to play with, and just sort of kept it going. Really, yeah.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah.
I guess that can work pretty well then. I guess you ultimately have to gauge how much your players are enjoying it too. And it sounded like yours really enjoyed having that NPC around, both as maybe a role-playing tool and also as a combatant that they can work with. And then
I'll be honest.
Yep.
I was really against them having him to start with.
Yeah, I bet.
I was not happy with how it turned out. But as the story sort of they progressed and they were enjoying it, and they were really creative, and it gave it was actually our cleric who sort of healed him up and convinced him to stay along. She was really happy with having him and sort of looking after him, and sort of they got him a bit of armor somewhere, and they somehow managed to blag their way into a city with him and kept him under control, and they enjoyed it. And when he did die in the siege, that was quite a big moment for them.
So here's a good follow-up on that. For when you use an NPC that's important, do you still follow NPC rules where if they hit 0, they're gonzo? Or and this is to all of you also, or do you ever follow PC rules? Do you allow a important NPC to go down and start bleeding out where somebody could rush up and stabilize them?
I think I had him auto-fail death saves, but I did have the so they had 3 rounds to attempt to get him up.
Oh, okay.
They didn't do the siege very well. Most of the farmers died, so they were too busy putting out fires.
That's a little sad footnote at the end. Most of the farmers died, though.
Yeah, I think the main family survived, but everybody else, they misplanned horribly, and they couldn't get to everybody, so he ended up going down that way. But I gave him that brief sort of period. They had the 3 extra rounds to try and get him back up. But
interesting.
I always base mine on morale. If they treat the people like crap, no, they get shot in the neck, they're dead.
Yeah.
But if they take the time to put work into their NPCs, their henchmen, their hirelings, if they care about them and they get to the point with that hireling's morale where they're like, yeah, I like these guys. If they go down, they get death saves.
So the one I've got from Storm King's Thunder early on, there was the siege of, what's the name of that town? Bryn Shander,
yeah.
Yes. All of those NPCs are supposed to give you quests, and one of them gives you a very important quest. And the one that gives you a very important quest, Reese had him run out into the field of giants.
I remember that. Got like fucking stepped on.
He got stepped on, and I literally, while that session was going on, I was sitting there going like, okay, is there any way for me to make him live through this so that they can actually get this quest later? But it was like the giant had done like 3 times his health in damage to him. It's like, no, I'll figure this out later. He's squished.
Oh, that's terrible.
I mean, yeah, I think it's a judgment call. It just depends on how important they are and how invested in and how invested the PCs are in them.
Do you ever have a player control the NPC?
I controlled him, but had the cleric rolling dice for the ogre. So they had.
Oh.
I was making decisions so that they weren't playing him in a way that he wouldn't act, but I was then leaving the luck to them, so that they did feel like they had some control over him.
That's a really interesting compromise, actually. So you did like the movement and the tactics, but anytime he rolled attack or damage, the player would actually roll the dice?
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice.
I can say that as a player, having to control an NPC, like for instance, being in a group that only has like 3 players, and to round out the group, the DM is like, well, I'm going to give you this NPC, and oh yeah, by the way, you're going to play him, was kind of like deflating to me because I really didn't want to. I just wanted to focus on my one character.
Mm-hmm.
But in certain situations where it helps me as the DM to like hand off NPCs, like you're going to control this one in this combat, because like Fort Vengeance, for example, like like having a bunch of zombies coming in and attacking Fort Vengeance, there's going to be a bunch of NPCs there, and you can just kind of hand them off to the players, and then it's more of a big battle. That's kind of a one-time, like maybe a 1-2 session scenario, not an ongoing thing. And I don't know, I just always forget about any other NPC tokens I'm supposed to control. I gotta, move them around.
Nice.
Even as a DM, like if I have an NPC in the group, the players will eventually be like, where's Volo? And I'm like, oh, he's way back here in the dungeon. And I gotta drag him over.
I feel like I'm getting called out. I feel like I'm getting called out right now.
So, yeah.
We had that one situation in the Fane of the Night Serpent, which was very interesting for crafting annihilation, in which the party was split for like almost the entire session, or at least the first half of it, I guess. And I had to try to figure out, well, half the party is basically not in the active party, like they're doing a thing that's going to take up this portion of the meanwhile this is happening section. And I had to figure out, okay, well, what is that party going to do? And I had a solution for one person, which is Zendala was in the party, and I just had Celeste just control her because she couldn't really control. I never told her she couldn't necessarily control her other character, but I just said, hey, that scene that's going on that we talked about last session is basically still going on, but here's what everybody else is doing. And I think the understanding was, okay, well, we're just going to stick in this scene and basically carry it out like, as happened. And then she will play as Zendala. And the problem I ran into is, well, who the fuck is Chris going to play? And we had like, well, we have that
12-year-old boy.
We have that little boy. 12 is probably generous, but
I think he was 10.
This poor little child boy that you all ended up liking so much. Again, that's one of those weird ass things that you don't know as a DM, like what players are going to latch onto and what they're just going to ignore and wave away. And this little boy was one of the things that you all just latched onto real tight. We're like, oh,
I think
shit.
what you run into a lot is it's really hard to role play 2 different characters at the same time.
Yeah.
So if you're asking a player to also control somebody else, well, now you're role playing your character, and this other character is like a side part of your character. It's not its own personality anymore. So in that situation, I was able to set Mannix aside entirely for that session and just, okay, I'm role playing a 12-year-old boy. Well, what does he want?
To do his best, damn it. To do his best.
That's right.
He's doing.
You almost have to do voices for each of the NPCs.
Sort of
Otherwise, like my son played 2 characters. I'm like, I have no idea which character you're talking to right now, because you're not using any kind of special voice.
Yeah.
And something
that's something that brings up something else you have to avoid with NPCs, which is if the DM is controlling the NPC, you never want to have that NPC talk to other NPCs, because then the DM talks to themselves for 5 minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and
Definitely.
that was part of
Which
what
is generally like just don't let the NPCs talk to, like, don't let them run the conversations, right? Like, just have them do what the players tell them to do.
Yeah.
And that's about it.
Oh, I feel like every good DM should be able to have a conversation with himself for at least 7.5 minutes.
I need this. Go ahead, Sean.
Oh, I was also just saying that sometimes these type of things just seem to happen organically when you would least expect it, kind of like George and the Grung.
Right.
Very true.
Raymond's an expert at making up storylines as he goes along.
Yes.
Like, nobody else just latch on something and be like, okay, this is the thing now.
Yeah, exactly. That was not part of his backstory at all. And I forget even how it started. I think like he like missed against a Grung, and like the Grung crit him or something against a random combat, and then he just fucking swore vengeance on the entire race from then on.
He wrote that in blood on his hand, and that was the end of it.
George will remember this. Yeah, so I've had a lot of experience using NPCs now in the party. If they are combat capable, which a lot of the guides in Tomb of Annihilation are, and especially I use them as a balancing tool, which I think this happened in Crafting Annihilation, but I remember some folks saying like, well, wait a minute, doesn't so-and-so get multi-attack? And I was like, well, yeah, but I wasn't using it because I didn't want to make I wouldn't want to make the NPCs too powerful. Like I wanted to scale them back down to the party. But because that early jungle level can be so difficult, because it's basically designed for levels, 1 through 4. And if you go out at level 2 or 3, that's pretty challenging. You can add in party NPCs to balance things. Obviously, as a DM, you can balance it however you want anyway, but that does help change things around. And then as you guys are more higher level, then I don't feel like the NPCs should accompany you in dungeons, because, I can tune the dungeon to where it's just balanced for the party and not for any of the NPCs. Chris, was there ever a situation where, and I want to ask you this directly, where you were like, well, come on, just come join with us in the dungeon? Or did you always kind of understand like, okay, Eric generally doesn't want us to have NPCs in dungeons? Because I was kind of surprised from my point of view, and I've talked about this in Crafting Annihilation before, where it just seems like at some point all the players understood, okay, these NPCs are just not going to come with us into these dungeons unless it's like a Hugh and the mine thing, where it's specifically like he wants, the whole quest is in there.
Honestly, I think you just broke us down over time, because what would happen? What would happen is that in fights, NPCs would just not be terribly helpful offensively. There'd be a lot of, okay, Artis is now tending to Dragon Bait. Okay, now Dragon Bait's moving boulders in the middle of the fight to get stuff off of Artis.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that going on, to where like, okay, they're not actually just attacking in combat.
Yeah.
To the point
no
where,
way in hell am I going to have Artists use the Ring of Winter in regular combat.
Right. To the point where we kind of understood, like, okay, if they were even with us when we went into this dungeon, it's not like they would be a whole hell of a lot of help. They would find something to do in the back, and we wouldn't hear from them for a while. So to some degree, yeah, that's just a level of understanding that, like, okay,
that's part of what we're talking about here, is though you don't want party NPCs to be that strong. Maybe I overtuned it too much, but you definitely don't want them to be close to players.
I've got my 2 big examples of that from Storm Kings. One is Felgalos is a super powerful. He's a straight up dragon.
Straight up dragon. Yep.
He does have the caveat that he's got permanent disadvantage because he's unlucky,
and an aura of like disadvantage
an
too.
Aura, yeah, which is something I added so that you guys didn't have a full grown dragon on in your team.
Yeah.
But the reason he was in your party is because you were about to go up against 2 dragons.
Yes.
Or they were young dragons. But you were so it was sort of a counterbalancing that. He wasn't expected to like help you fight a bunch of fucking orcs or anything. He was there to help you because there was other dragons to fight.
Yeah,
that worked out fine. That worked out just fine. Then later on, though, the climax of Storm King's Thunder.
Spoilers for Storm King's Thunder, I guess.
Spoilers for Storm King's Thunder.
Go watch that campaign.
The climax, as written, which I, in hindsight, realized I probably should have just tweaked it from as written, has a bunch of giants with you as you go to fight the big bad of Storm King's Thunder.
Mm-hmm.
Well, even with a bunch of players, giant-sized and empowered, a bunch of storm giants are still crazy powerful.
Yeah.
And impressive looking. So then we ran into the opposite problem. Okay, well now these guys probably shouldn't have been here for this fight, or they should have. It was a problem because they were putting you up against an ancient dragon at the end of a campaign, and you guys were only level
Wizards
12.
tries to have their cake and eat it too. They try to have these big, awesome, like world-ending fights, but the campaigns only go to like level 10 or 11.
Yeah. So that was their compromise. Like, okay, you guys are only 11, but you got a bunch of storm giants. That doesn't play very well because the storm giants, even though I think there was only 2 of them with you at the time, every time they hit, they were doing like 35 damage. And everyone was just like, oh, okay. I think at one point Reese even said, like, should we go home? Like, what are we doing here?
You guys got this.
I remember he looked at he looked off to the left, I think at his wife, and looked at the camera, was like, do we need to be here?
Yeah.
That was literally his words. But I definitely think that that the whole having the NPCs or henchmen fight, like, it depends on how you balance your battles. I usually balance my battles like higher. They're usually hard to deadly is how I do my stuff, because the CR system is usually skewed to make it easy.
Yes,
I have found that too. Normal battles, players will just destroy them.
Yep.
Yeah. So my battles are usually tough to begin with. So having my henchmen that they have with them, as long as they do the stuff that they're supposed to do, I have no problem having a henchman fight. Because I also play my monsters competent depending on who they are. Like I said, if it's Snigbat and their band of 12 disgusting goblins, you probably can just think that they're just going to swing swords at you. But if you're going up against like a battalion of hobgoblins, you better believe they're going to be using cover. You better believe they're going to be ducking and going prone behind cover so you can't target them. Things like that. Which makes having henchmen good. It's like, hey, henchman, flank. I'm going this way because the hobgoblins are playing smarter.
Well, the other alternative for NPCs is just if you've overtuned it or realize you've overtuned it, suddenly you've got extra targets on the field that you can use your NPCs as.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's used for balancing. But sometimes, depending upon your party composition, like in the dungeon I'm running now, they really don't have any spellcasters. So I threw Volo in there, and he's just been a utility guy with some consequences. If they, they're in a situation where, it was kind of a trap room, and they were struggling to get the door open, and one of the players was like, can you do something? But like, turn into the NPC who I just had in the background. Can you do something, Bolo? And he went and cast knock. So the consequence of that is aggro, because of the 300 feet or 100 feet of noise that it makes. So I aggroed them as a consequence of using him, but it got him through that room.
Tiny, I have to ask, did you save my character, man? I was ready to give him up. I was ready.
No, I did nothing. I did nothing to save him. I mean, you guys did that.
Nice. All right, we have been going for about an hour now, so why don't we start going through our final closing thoughts on using NPCs with the party. Let's go bottom to top, starting with Tiny.
Well, I guess I'll say one thing is, as a DM, if you feel like you have a crush on your NPC, you just need to get rid of that NPC. That's when they become a DMPC, and it is the worst as a player, like, feeling like you're being outshined by an NPC.
That's a good point. We actually hadn't covered the DMPC, but that is something you could fall into. Basically, don't create an NPC that is so sexy that you like them more than the players.
I've been through it, and it's bad.
Yeah. Marcos, closing thoughts on using NPCs in the party.
If the party's into it, go for it. If the party's not into it, don't do it. Find out other ways to get your information or pass on, quests and things to your party. And really just go by what they want, because at the end of the day, that's what you're playing.
It's very true. Andy?
NPCs are cannon fodder.
That's partially true.
Just let them step forward at the end of a sword.
No. NPCs, I think like I mentioned at the beginning, they really work best when they're just kind of NPCs enrich roleplay, but they complicate combat. And in combat, they really work best when you can have them facilitate your party or just be a mascot or an inspiration for your party and not the focal point of any combat. Out of character, you handle them like normal, but I think those are their best roles in combat.
Agreed. Sam, final thoughts on NPCs?
Party NPCs are difficult, but if you use them right in a way that the party enjoys, and they can add a fair bit to what you're doing.
Nice. Chris?
I think NPCs are an invaluable tool, as long as they don't start to take too much of the limelight. As long as they aren't, as long as the players are controlling the flow and controlling the action, then having an NPC there gives you a lot of flexibility and a lot of potential that you didn't have otherwise.
Sean?
Well, I guess one last thing to just say that hasn't already been covered is also don't be afraid to tweak your NPCs a little bit. If it seems like they're doing a little too well, don't be hesitate to scale them back a little bit. I know you talked about them with the Tabaxi. But also if they're falling a little too far behind, don't be afraid to maybe boost them up just a hair a little bit, but still keep them behind the party, but still keep them useful.
Yeah, and that was something that unfortunately we didn't get to talk about, but could you give somebody better armor or magic weapons and that kind of thing could even make them more powerful and more useful. And
what player is going to give up their magic weapons to?
Certainly not my players. That's for damn sure.
Hey, I mean, once you get level 9, you don't need that +1, moon sword anymore.
I suppose so.
I mean, you think so, but
Bobby the backup bard, cold.
But it looks so good.
Everybody suddenly turns into Gollum when it comes to magic items. So I don't see too much sharing going on. This has been an awesome chat. I've really grown to enjoy using NPCs after Tomb of Annihilation quite a bit. I've also learned a lot about how to use them and how not to use them, when to kind of dial it back. And it's going to be something that I will continuously learn, throughout being a DM. And I feel like I've learned a lot tonight with this month's session. So thank you all so much to Sean, Sam, Andy, Marcos, Tiny, and Chris. We are doing our DM roundtables every month. I am Eric. Hope to see you all again for next month's DM roundtable discussion.
Goodbye.
Bye.
See ya.
Goodbye.
Bye.